Welcome to Pittsburgh Earth Days, The Dirt Podcast, featuring Grant Ervin, live from the Point Park University Center for Media Innovation. Here is your host, Grant Ervin.
Hello, and welcome to The Dirt Podcast. I'm your host, Grant Ervin, and we're coming to you from the Center for Media Innovation at Point Park University. Exciting new episode here of The Dirt, where we have our friend from the Center for Sustainable Business at the University of Pittsburgh, CB Bhattacharya. CB, how are you today?
I'm well, Grant. Nice to be here.
Yeah, it's good to see you, my friend. It's we were just commenting. It's interesting that we're not in two dimensions. We're in full form here, so it's kind of exciting to be here in person with you. We've been Zoom buddies for
forever.
So, well, hey, we really appreciate you being here on The Dirt with us, where we cover all things sustainable in the city of Pittsburgh and the surrounding region. CB, just a quick intro from my standpoint, has been a real an illuminating factor here for sustainability in Pittsburgh. Recent addition to the Pittsburgh scene for 2 years now.
4 years.
4 years. Oh my gosh!
Time flies when you're having fun.
It's like that COVID time frame.
That's right.
Where there's a whole time-space continuum gap. But CB has been a great addition to the scene here in Pittsburgh, and has really been enlightening for the work that we do at the city of Pittsburgh, and we're glad to have him here as a guest. CB, maybe just to jump in, if you can introduce yourself in terms of how'd you come to Pittsburgh, and maybe a little bit about your background and kind of the role you have at the University of Pittsburgh.
Sure, Grant. Again, thanks for having me, and it's nice to be here. Quick background. So I was born and brought up in India, and my undergraduate degree was in economics, from where I went on to do an MBA with a focus in marketing. And once I graduated, I got a job with a consumer products company called Reckitt Benckiser. And the task that I was given was to market a brand of toilet cleaner in the Indian market. Now, this is 1985, mind you. You were probably not born, or maybe very, very little.
I was around. Yeah.
But so I said, well, no place to go but up. I mean, toilet cleaner, it doesn't get more basic than that. But, you have to deal with the cards that you're given. So I launched that brand of toilet cleaner in the Indian market, and I'm very happy to say that it's the largest selling brand of toilet cleaner in India today. So
That's awesome.
It's called Harpic. And so when all of you guys are, counting sheep while going to sleep, I count clean toilets. And I feel proud for having done something useful in life. Anyway, after 3 years of brand management, I came to the Wharton School, University of Pennsylvania, other side of this state, to do a PhD in marketing. PhD stands for a permanent head damage, which I do have. And on graduating, my first job as a professor was with Emory University in Atlanta. Now, whilst I was at Emory University, I met the CEO of this company called Ben & Jerry's that everybody would be familiar with, the CEO, Mr. Ben Cohen himself. And this gentleman asked me a very interesting question, and he said, we do a lot of things for society. We do a lot of things for the environment. Can you help me understand if what we do for the environment and society, does it help us sell ice cream? And I was like, that's an interesting question. I don't know the answer to it, but I will noodle on that, because sales, every marketing person is trying to increase sales.
Right.
But as drivers of sales back in those days, we were only thinking about price and product and, promotion, advertising, that kind of stuff. We were not thinking of environmental and social attributes being possible drivers of sales. So I picked up that topic and started delving into it. And lo and behold, I was kind of, smack dab in the middle of kind of corporate social responsibility movement. And I guess as an academic, I was probably one of the early ones in that, doing that, and had some publishing success. And therefore, my career transitioned from kind of doing brand health and brand loyalty, these kind of mathematical models that I was doing during my PhD, that all went out the window, and I had a brand new research program kind of out there. Well, after Emory, I went to Boston University, where I spent about 12 years. And then on a lark, moved to Berlin, Germany, and went for 1 year, but ended up staying 8 years in Berlin. And so whilst in Berlin, I published my first book, Leveraging Corporate Responsibility, and also started a center there that deals with the issue of corporate sustainability and how companies can embed sustainability into their DNA. But at some point, I got headhunted by the University of Pittsburgh, who came calling to see if I would have any interest in moving stateside. And well, as the saying goes, the rest is history. So here I am. And at the University of Pittsburgh, I hold the Zoffer Chair in Sustainability and Ethics. Chalk it up to short-term memory lapses or whatever. Here I am, and I started a center here as well after having come to Pittsburgh, which is called the Center for Sustainable Business, and which I know we will talk about shortly. So yeah, in short, my research focuses on corporate sustainability and how it's possible actually to do well financially by doing good in social and environmental terms. So to answer Mr. Ben Cohen's original question.
I was going to ask about that. I got to unpack it. So I'm a big fan of 6 degrees of sustainability, or 6 degrees of connection, like 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon.
Yeah.
So now we're going to start a new one, 6 degrees of sustainability, I think. Freudian slip there. I got to ask, so now between you, I'm connected to Ben of Ben and Jerry's. That's a really interesting connection. So how did that come about?
So at Emory University, we had another professor by the name of Jeff Sonnenfeld, who was a leadership guru, and he used to host these leadership conferences. Mm-hmm. So there was this leadership conference at Emory that Mr. Ben Cohen came to as a guest.
Okay.
And we keep getting these invitations all the time. 9 out of times I might not go. I'm tired in the evening.
Yeah.
But that one time I decided to go along to that meeting, and there I met Mr. Cohen, who, I don't think he knows this story himself, but he has actually significantly impacted my life.
It's pretty interesting how you have those types of fortunate connections that pivot a conversation one way or the other that can create a path. They're an interesting example of a company that has been at the forefront in terms of thinking of whether we call it corporate social responsibility or following ESG standards, environmental social governance. What leads? You've seen some of that arc happen. What was kind of the impetus in the early days of CSR? And what is it? Leadership? It is the quintessential component that pushes that conversation for a company?
That's a great question, Grant. Yeah, I would say it's leadership and most importantly, organizational culture, because leadership cannot kind of ram things down employees' throats and get them to do things. But leadership, with a healthy organizational culture that encourages employees to kind of, engage in CSR and on sustainability issues, that really creates that kind of vibrancy in an organization. And it's interesting that Ben & Jerry's, which was independent at the time that I met them, is now owned by Unilever. And
somebody you have a connection with as well, right?
And somebody you have a connection there as well. We can discuss that. But, it's amazing that in Unilever you can find actually all the employees kind of acting like sustainability managers and not saying that, no, this is someone else's problem. Everybody's saying, no, I have to do my part for the planet. Now, in a company like that has 160,000 employees, that's truly not possible, not just without leadership, which is there under the aegis of Paul Pullman, all of this happened, but as well kind of, spreading, cascading that purpose, why do we do what we do, that idea kind of down through the ranks of the organization so that every person can actually play a role.
Was there something, I guess I'm trying to do my timeline here. So is there something in like the mid-90s, late 90s, when you were at Emory that was happening in the business, the realm of business, or in terms of that cultural shift to start to think about these things, or was there an organic effort, or was there a moment?
I mean, the moment might have been, kind of the meeting at Rio, because at that time climate change kind of started rearing its head, and all these social ills started rearing their head. At the same time, this gap between CEO compensation and kind of worker compensation also came to light. Ben & Jerry's was one of those outstanding companies that at that time said 7:1 will be the ratio between the highest paid and lowest paid. So it was a reckoning by business and forward-looking business leaders at that time that, hey, there is trouble on the horizon. We may be raking in money now, but if we do not kind of, pivot our businesses in a different direction, in a more inclusive and equitable direction, then, maybe there will be kind of trouble ahead. Not to mention the competitive advantage that companies could actually earn by by differentiating themselves in the CSR space.
That's interesting. And so like academia has seen this same types of shift too, right? In terms of how you teach and what you teach in a business school in particular. I'm thinking about like the Chicago School, right? And, and the Milton Friedman kind of treatise and those sorts of things. There's a shift afoot in universities, am I right? In terms of the thinking, in terms of sustainability is an important component of corporate culture. And the University of Pittsburgh is now kind of the forefront of that, right? In terms of the establishment of the center. Maybe if you could talk a little bit about what is CSB and why CSB is so important, I think.
Oh, yeah. It's my pride and joy for sure. So when I came to Pittsburgh in 2017, I started a course in sustainable business. So there was actually no course being taught at that time to the MBA students and to the executives MBA students on sustainability. I mean, there was ethics and there were lots of other things going on, but I started a course on sustainability, and it really has grown in popularity. So I started teaching one section, and now I teach two sections, and they're both full. And hopefully sooner or later, that will be a course that all MBA students will, want to take. That's my aspiration. So that was kind of on the pedagogic front, and other professors are offering other related courses as well on, socially related investments, socially responsible investment, or, impacts of climate change, other kinds of topics. We are discussing that now. So indeed, there has been a shift in the pedagogic landscape. But then in the outreach landscape, the center was actually founded. The Center for Sustainable Business was founded in October 2019 with a grant from the Heinz Endowments, who believed in my kind of proposal that there could be an entity in Pittsburgh that works with companies to mainstream sustainability and help them embed it into their corporate DNA. I mean, that's the basic overall purpose of the center, right? But how do we do this? We do this kind of, the how is through kind of research. So we do academic research. So my whole life is dedicated to researching issues in sustainability. And then we do it by teaching. So the idea is that we want to make our future generations more aware of sustainability challenges. And in fact, I have, again, a theme and aspiration in mind, which is to make each of our students that graduate a sustainability generalist, as I call it, so that, they have the knowledge to pitch in and help in whatever function they are in an organization. And then the third one is actually this thought leadership piece, which is kind of where companies come together in multiple forums, and we curate meetings for them discussing wicked problems in any area that they face related to sustainability. I mean, it could be how do we talk to our customers? It could be what is ESG? It could be kind of, how do we embed sustainability in our supply chains? So all kinds of questions. And these questions are actually provided by the member companies, So we have a membership program, and companies join as members. All this information is available on our website, or if anybody reaches out, I'd be happy to give it to them. But suffice it to say that today we have 12 corporate members, including the likes of IBM and PPG and Dick's Sporting Goods, People's Natural Gas, Consol Energy, Target, and I want to be inclusive, but there are 12 of them. And
the longer the list, the more difficult it becomes to remember them.
Correct.
All.
So sure. I just mentioned the first 5 or 6 that came to my mind, and these meetings are kind of typically in one of 3 areas that we focus on. One is decarbonizing Middle America. Mm-hmm. So that the center last year produced this Marshall Plan for Middle America roadmap. So we worked closely with the city of Pittsburgh, with you, with the mayor.
For that.
Yeah, and so decarbonizing Middle America is something we are very interested in working on as a catalyst, as an enabler, bringing parties together to make that happen. And then we have a work stream called Workforce 100, which is our kind of diversity, equity, and inclusion vertical, if you will, or work stream, where we want to make it a just transition in every organization. We do not want to have workers being excluded or inequitably treated. So whatever we can do with companies to make that better, that's one of our ambitions. And the third work stream is called ESG Rosetta Stone. So, because of ESG has become the talk of town, and everybody and their uncle are giving managers incentives for fulfilling ESG targets, and the Biden administration is asking for disclosure on the ESG front to be able to trade stocks. I mean, all of these conversations are going on. So we figured that we could actually weigh in and help out companies with saying what should you measure, why should you measure, what should you measure, how should you disclose, very, very importantly. So those are the 3 work streams. So those are the 3 whats do we do, right. And the 3 hows are the research, teaching, and thought leadership.
It's interesting to reflect on that a little bit, because I'd love to break it down with you. So you kind of have a vertical thought process going, right, where you have the individual and the teaching that is a key component of that, who's producing generalists that are the people that are actually going to be working in these companies, right? So you're kind of infiltrating their employee supply chain, if you will, from the bottom up, right?
In a good way, right? So the future
it's not a secret.
It's no. It's all
very intentional.
It's a virtuous cycle,
yeah.
Right? So
it's interesting in that, where did you see the demand? Was it coming from the student or from the companies, or a little bit of both in terms of building that pipeline?
Yeah, it's definitely a little bit of both. I mean, there are students who are excited about the future and who want to work in sustainability-related issues. And at the same time, there are companies who are realizing that, that this mainstreaming is harder than they thought because, there's just too much training involved of the current workforce.
It's interesting to me. I gave a lecture at a class at another university. I apologize. It was American a couple months ago. And I, went through talking with each of the students. The first question I asked before I give my talk was, what do you want to do when you get out, right? Which is a frightening question to ask a student. And the answers were like, I want to be an ESG analyst, and I'm like, wow, just to see that change in terms of the students' interest as well as their clarity with regards to, I want to measure and manage kind of these performance standards, because there's obviously a market demand, kind of as you're saying, but that's where their interests lie too. Like they're questioning corporate culture in that regard, which is fascinating to see.
Yes, and that you're going to see that increasing, over time, and therefore I would urge all business schools to build capacity in that regard, that there will be more and more people who will be interested in these things. And why not? I mean, you see, if they have grown up in a world where, so it's an 18-year-old today, I mean, even 5 years ago, since 5 years ago, has been hearing about Greta Thunberg and the climate protests and everything else that's going around the world. So they are the ones who are aware and woke. They are also a little bit panicked. I mean, kind of, hey, I mean, if we don't do this, who will? And maybe investment banks aren't cracked up to be, what it was kind of, 20, 30 years ago.
You see that you talked a little bit about some of the companies that are, members of the center. They're obviously at the vanguard. Two questions there is, do they have the same sense of urgency that the students have, A, and then B, what are some of those skills and capacities that they're looking for to help kind of build their teams, their sustainability teams?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think when you kind of enter into an organization, perhaps the most important skill that they're looking for is this nascent idea of or nascent interest in taking ownership of the problem, right? Okay. So I understand that this is as much my job as somebody in the sustainability department. This has not happened yet. I mean, or we're just getting there, I would say, starting to get there, because most folks continue to believe that sustainability is someone else's problem, right?
Yeah.
Hey, we have a department. I mean, like every other thing. I mean, they believe that diversity is someone else's. Actually, diversity is as much everybody's problem as sustainability is. So all of these kind of mega issues, if you will, are ultimately kind of human being problems. I mean, yours and mine as much as anybody else's. So I would say that the first thing that they're looking for is that awareness, that recognition that, I need to jump in, even if I'm in finance or accounting, it doesn't matter. I need to do my part in this. The second thing is that they're looking for basic awareness of things like the SDGs. Hey, what are the Sustainable Development Goals? I mean, not saying that they have to know all 17 names, but that there is something called Sustainable Development Goals, and that we are, as a collective, obliged to work on those goals if we want to get to these targets. So they expect, I believe companies expect the students to know about the Paris Accord and the fact that we have to keep within certain boundaries. And then about kind of, say, hey, what is a Scope 3 emission? You ask that question out there. I mean, you'll draw a lot of blank faces. So, but it's not, and 80% of the companies don't manage their Scope 3 emissions. And for our listeners, Scope 3 emissions are those that happen outside of your own operations. I mean, that happens in your supply chain and so on. And the awareness is low. So as long as the student who's graduating essentially knows the basics of kind of, what is it and how can I play a role in this, and has a basic understanding of the terminology, I think that's, then you're fit for purpose.
That's interesting. The other thing too, I noticed just to talk a little bit about the Marshall Plan for Middle America and the work that we collaborated on in developing that, to frame that around the just transition conversation in your members, there is some intentionality, I think, also in who your members are, in that they represent kind of different verticals of the business sector, right? So you have, a little bit in the retail space, you have folks in the oil and gas industry and manufacturing, et cetera. And you brought up the conversation of the just transition and what that means for this region. Maybe could you go into that a little bit in terms of, the role that those companies play in helping to advance that transition, both from an economic, but also the social and governance standpoint of how do we uplift the region and the opportunity there?
Yeah. So the just transition, essentially, to me, it represents that kind of, when Middle America is decarbonized, it should not be with an entirely new workforce that comes from another country or what have you, but the fact that those folks who used to work in coal mines or other kind of fossil fuel, old school economies, that they are not left behind, that they are not excluded when we go to renewable energies. And, and newer technologies and so on. Now, one thing we have to understand is it is an ecosystem that's being transformed, not just individual, not just individual companies or anything like that. And we are talking about this regional transformation. And there are many companies who are doing different kinds of things. I mean, so for some of our members actually have to change their business models. I mean, because they are operating, let's say, pipelines, natural gas pipelines, or, fossil fuel plants and so on in Middle America. And if they have to transition to the new economy, they have to know what their new product line is going to be. So that's one kind of, challenge that companies have. Now, there are other companies like renewable energy companies like Enel, who are also part of the center. I mean, who already have the product, but may now want to engage in kind of skilling the workforce, those who used to work for the mines and pipelines and such, and so that they are able to actually transition to this kind of new work, whatever it is required to do in these renewable energy plants and so on. And then there are companies like IBM and Evoqua. And you might remember this one meeting that we had in April, where both of those companies actually came and spoke about kind of the challenges. I mean, Evoqua does water, and nothing is possible without good, clean water.
Snehal here last episode.
Snehal Desai, yeah. Yes. So your listeners would be well aware of that. I mean, kind of how water can be a...
I like when our episodes could bridge back and reference each other, so that's helpful. But go ahead.
Yeah, no. I mean, all I'm saying is that ancillary services like, like water, and at the same time, IBM with their artificial intelligence and their, internet capabilities and all of that. I mean, all of those things are actually needed for that just transition. So if someone doesn't have, how will they homeschool people or remote work, if there's no broadband capability? So, Verizon has a role, IBM has a role, Enel has a role, and your companies like Peoples and Consol Energy have a role because they need to offer kind of a different product. ING Bank has a role. I mean, they're not members, but we are friends yet. Yes, because of sustainable finance. I mean, somebody's got to be financing those projects. So I think pretty much almost every kind of company actually has a role in this just transition, and we need to start with that. Cultural belief. I mean, that has to be the bullseye that the transition would be just. It has to be.
What's fascinating, you've kind of hit on this theme a couple times, and you actually wrote a book on it, right? So, small actions, big differences. One of the common themes through that book is this idea, inside a company, that everyone has a role in sustainability. Maybe talk a little bit about the origins of that book and the interview process, I think, which had to be fun. I think,
yes.
In terms of having those conversations and maybe some of the big takeaways that you'd like to share with listeners.
Okay, here we go. So the origins of the book really came from my executive education experiences. So I was in Berlin at this time at the European School of Management and Technology, and we have a very strong executive education program, and there are executives from all these big European companies like Siemens and BASF and Lufthansa who would come and sit in these sessions, and I would be teaching sustainability. And so as soon as we would talk about it, so what do you do in that field? It's just said, well, no. This is someone else's problem. We've got a department; they'll take care of it. I have more important things to do, like meeting my budgets and this and that. And so once I heard that a few times, it started kind of bothering me a bit it's just like, if everybody says that it's someone else's problem, I mean, how's it going to work? And then you go and talk to a small company and say, hey, what about sustainability? They say, well, it's the big company's problem. If they don't do anything, what are we going to do? What can we impact? And then you go and talk to the big companies, and they'll say, well, it's the government's problem. If they don't regulate something, what are we going to do? And then the government says that, well, it's the other country's problem. It's not really our country, so let them fix their thing first. So I was like, no, there is no way we are going to solve this or combat the climate crisis and other social ills that we have, if everybody, wants to pass the buck to someone else, so we need to do something. So I started to study, companies where sustainability had taken off in a much bigger and more prominent way. And so over the course of 5 years, I visited companies of all stripes and shapes. Some were at the forefront of sustainability, some were not as far ahead, but more or less everybody had their heart and mind in the right place and wanted to do something. And I saw, and through 100+ interviews, I kind of gleaned what works and what doesn't. I mean, because every company was not doing everything right. I mean, many of them were getting pieces of it, etc. And so that was my job, was to, from the interviews, I had to glean kind of what works and what doesn't. I mean, and I used that knowledge to develop a model, which I unfold in the book. And without getting into the details of the model, I mean, because I would like people to get the book and read it for themselves. The most important step is to define a corporate purpose, And
in terms of a product or service, or is it deeper than that?
It's deeper than that. It's deeper than that. So the purpose is the answer to the question, why do we do what we do? Not what do we do, where are we going, not mission or vision, but why do we do what we do,
So if you take your toilet bowl cleaner, for example, it's not just to sell toilet bowl cleaner, but it's sanitation.
No. Yeah, sanitation, hygiene, health, satisfaction, self-esteem. So it's not just functional benefits, but it's, kind of psychosocial benefits as well. And that's okay. And it's the same way, kind of, why do we do what we do? Why do we build cars? Well, not to sell cars, but perhaps to provide mobility. And there is a huge difference to the answer the company kind of comes up with in this context, because I can assure you that a person who's working on an assembly line, for a car, would much rather believe that they're helping people go from place A to place B than, that their job is to maximize profits for the company. So we lost our narrative somehow in the business world in the United States, more so than in other places, with Milton Friedman and the other Chicago School of Thought that you mentioned. So profit maximization became cause du jour, right?
Yeah, and it's interesting. Like, you see companies like the one that comes to mind for me is Ford Motor Company, right? Who's no longer a car manufacturer, but they provide mobility. They're a mobility company. And so, like, they're thinking, just like you were saying, this higher purpose of why it is what we do. And as a result, you see them diversifying their investments and their R&D practices and product lines, and all that kind of changes suit.
Yeah. Isn't it nice?
I think it's amazing, particularly in, like, if you think about the energy space, the one that I often noodle around is like, and this isn't to pick on a particular member but in the gas industry, like, do we provide a volumetric basis of gas? That's kind of the current mindset. Or do we provide heat? And, like, if you provide heat, you're providing a totally different, opening your world up to a totally different line of services, right?
Right, absolutely. And this is the fundamental. Electricity company, and if you want to sell more electricity, you would want as many holes in the house as poor insulation as possible.
Right.
But if your job is to keep the person warm or cool, then you'll want the insulation to be as good as possible, so that you have to pump less power in there. So it's funny, how, when you think of businesses in a different way, I mean, there's a whole kind of light bulbs go flashing. And the one story about purpose is, like, when I was visiting a Unilever factory in the middle of absolutely nowhere in India, I saw it was a drought, stressed. It was a water-stressed area, lots of droughts and stuff. And the employees had come together to figure out a way of how to harvest rainwater and capture it, and then use that in their production processes. Nobody had to come tell them, and this is the idea.
It wasn't about materiality or.
Yeah.
I mean, it is.
It is, yeah. So it is material. I mean, kind of to do that, but what I propose in the book is that there is this sense of psychological ownership that you can develop, that each of us can develop towards sustainability, and there's a rich literature on ownership saying that if there are things that we care about and we like, we as human beings, we like to take ownership of things that we take care about. So that's the needle I want companies to kind of push and say, hey, make them owners of sustainability.
It's interesting, and just a personal reflection and kind of a thank you in a sense is that after reading the book, one of the things that we began to do at the city of Pittsburgh was this was a kind of a concurrent path, but this is a good example. We adopted the Sustainable Development Goals. Mm-hmm. And so that was around 2019, and then in 2020, and now again in 2021, we've produced our first, and we'll release later on this year, our second voluntary local review, which is basically our analysis of our performance as an organization based on the 17 sustainable goals. And what was interesting about that wasn't the report, it wasn't the end product, but it was the process. And what was fascinating about it was I took that mindset into establishing our team. And so it was a number of different departments, but as we did that, we saw the different departments take ownership of different components of sustainability. And so all of a sudden, what was, one team's job, our sustainability and resilience division, like you said, they take care of that. It becomes everybody's role. So all of a sudden, we have a gender equity commission participating. We have our commission on human relations. We have public safety. We have our planning department. And so each of those components of the SDG shows everybody's visibility into why their oar is in the water.
Right.
And I think that's one of the things that, as you see companies start to adopt that, the same thing can happen, right?
Yeah, I mean, I have seen companies where kind of from production to disposal, everybody is engaged. From procurement to disposal. Mm-hmm. So supply chain operations, marketing, human resources, finance, accounting, investor relations. Nobody is exempt. Yep. Communications. So which is why in our center meetings, we always invite two people to come from an organization. So one is the sustainability person, and the other one is the person from the team under discussion. So if you're talking about how do we talk to customers about sustainability, we would ask a company to not only come with their sustainability person, but also with their marketing person, so that they as a duo can go back to the company and implement some of the learnings that they had from...
It's like bring a buddy.
Yes. Not just anybody.
Not just anybody, but bring a buddy.
That's right, yeah.
Hey, we have a few more minutes left. One of the things I wanted to kind of ask you, and this has been a general theme, the last few episodes here on The Dirt, as we've been in the midst of this pandemic and how it has shifted all of our mindsets, but particularly with the issues that relate to management and sustainability. I'd be really interested to hear kind of your insights in terms of, what are some of the things that you're seeing, the trends that you're watching, both from a management standpoint, but also in terms of where are we going in the sustainability space, particularly for the corporate sector? What are some of the things on the horizon that are really interesting, CB Bhattacharya?
So I believe that by now, kind of, climate change is not being questioned anymore. I mean, that's a tremendous. It's a long time coming, but better late than never. So I think that companies are aggressively, setting targets, and many of them essentially are talking about becoming net zero by certain timelines. Fewer are actually showing the path, and I would encourage more and more companies to actually tell us how they're going to get to net zero by 2050 rather than just make a blanket statement. But it seems that kind of, that realization has sunk in that they need to change something about their kind of energy mix and where it's coming and where the emissions are going to go and all of that. So I think there is definitely something that's moving forward in that direction, albeit not at the speed at which we would want. There is also a lot of confusion, though, in terms of what net zero really means, and what the narrative is missing right now is the idea of reducing humankind's consumption, which is at the root of this problem. but everybody's saying, okay, we will sequester the carbon. Well, if you sequester the carbon or you store the carbon, will sooner or later come back to bite you, because you're sweeping the rug under the carpet. So we need to figure all that out and get companies to be more honest and more understanding. But yes, there is a lot of activity on that front. There is a lot of activity in sustainable finance. So we will see banks increasingly dedicating parts of their portfolios to green projects, and so that those will increase in momentum and size as well. And the last thing I think I want to say is that I think what the pandemic has done, at least to those of us who have eyes and ears, is again exposed the huge gaps in the human, how we treat human beings and how human beings live their lives, and the exposure to risk and all of that. So I am hopeful, and this is more aspirational than real. I am hopeful that companies, desperately take a look at where they're excluding their workforce, and try to figure out ways of including them. I mean, again, I've seen a lot of shouting about appointing chief diversity officers and that, but I'm less impressed with that. I would be more impressed to see that you're really strengthening the base of your organization by offering more more benefits, by being more person-centric than we have so far. So I think the human resources function, I expect the human resources function to actually grow in stature within the organization, and to be able to meet the Business Roundtable's objectives, which they came out in 2019 with a new statement. 189 businesses came out to say, well, businesses need to be more inclusive. They're not working for the benefit of all. They're only working for the benefit of shareholders. So I would expect, again, that as younger folks get into organizations, put pressure on cultural change, that some of this gap that we have between the haves and the have-nots is actually gonna decline. And I hope I see that in my lifetime, which is not a great length of time left, but hopefully that's these are some of the few things that we can get going to make for a better world.
That's interesting. That's some really great thoughts there, CB. I appreciate it. I would like to thank you for being a guest here on The Dirt. This has been a fabulous conversation, and we hope you come back sometime soon and continue to share some of these insights with us.
Anytime for you, Grant.
Awesome. So thank you so much for being a great listener here on The Dirt. We want to thank our team here at Point Park University and the Center for Media Innovation, as well as the team from Earth Day Pittsburgh. Thanks so much for listening in. We'll catch you next time on The Dirt. I'm Grant Ervin, and we'll talk to you soon. Be well.